Well, good morning, everyone. It's so great to see you all. May I also add my welcome to Ed's. It's so lovely to be here as we continue to explore this sermon series on walking with Jesus to the edges and beyond, where we are asking, what does it mean for us to walk with those who feel like outsiders? And I hope that Ed's sermons in the previous 2 weeks, as we began our series on loving the marginalised and seeking the marginalised, have encouraged you and challenged you, because Jesus calls us all to ensure no one is left behind. And those prayers just now, nothing is impossible with God. He knows us so completely. Nothing is impossible with God. He calls us to be a family, a united family, and I know that obviously is so hard, so difficult, especially when there are these boundaries between us, some natural and some that we've put there. But God can crash those barriers down, and He can be with us so that we can show the world what it means, what it can mean to be united, or at least that is the prayer, that is the hope. And that is a bit more of what we're going to be exploring today and throughout the rest of this sermon series. We're going to zero on today a bit more of how we might go about this, how we might go about approaching people who feel on the margins, who might feel neglected, whether that's been actually for their whole lives, or maybe it's just been this week. And in a way, today's topic was actually the general overarching lesson that I explored in my first 3 years of university studying theology, theology being the study of God and the Bible and all that. And so our particular focus is something that I really have thought a lot about, and it has, I can testify, it has made a huge difference to how I think and how I act across the board. For me, it began this time, 6 years ago, when the media coverage of the refugee crisis was probably at its peak, when we were hearing all the time about new waves of people entering Europe. There were ferocious debates about what should be done about it, and most anyway, on the media, said we shouldn't be accepting people to Britain. They said we were already doing enough, and that there was no room in our small island. In particular, there was a lot of talk about the so-called Calais jungle, which was a refugee camp that was home to an absolute minimum of 10,000 people, and it was growing every day. Most of the coverage that I saw, at least, was about the fiery uprisings in the camp and the refugees' violence. And suffice to say, I really only went into this experience hearing negative things. But that's what I did. I went into the experience. A certain person that you might remember called Mark Hurst brought a group of us from Battle Baptist to go to the Calais jungle, to see it for ourselves. And as some of you might recall, we spent a week going into the camp, learning about the situation, and most importantly, meeting refugees, meeting people there. And while we were there, we encountered people who had nothing, who had left their whole family behind them, and some of them were kids that had traveled thousands of miles all by themselves, and they knew no one there. We're going to pause there for a moment as we just consider, if you were me going there, what would you aim to do for these people? What would your attitude be while you go there or as you're heading there? And do you think that you'd come back changed? Oh, I won't scratch my head again. So in order to explore this morning, we're going to have a little look at how Jesus treated the marginalised and broken. So let's read Luke chapter 5, verses 27 to 32. And it should come up on the screen now. We're having projector issues, so I will read it. Are we able to put it up on the camera in front of me, the screen in front of me? If you just click it, it should come up anyway on. No. This has happened twice now. Thank you, Ed. I need to stop relying on the technology. This has happened twice. Yeah. John was telling me that we need pen and paper. What happened to good pen and paper? And I hate to say it, but I think he might be right. All right, so it's Luke chapter 5, verses 27 to 32. After this, Jesus went out and saw a tax collector by the name of Levi sitting at his tax booth. "Follow me," Jesus said to him. And Levi got up, left everything, and followed him. Then Levi had a great banquet for Jesus at his house, and a large crowd of tax collectors and others were eating with them. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, who belonged to their sect, not a very good translation, the teachers of the law, their teachers of the law, the Pharisees' teachers of the law, complained to his disciples, "Why do you eat and drink with tax collectors and sinners?" Why do you eat and drink with tax collectors and sinners? Jesus answered them, "It is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance." Our passage begins with, "After these things." Before today's passage, Jesus has just been out there conquering the forces of death by teaching and healing, and now he spots a tax collector. 2 weeks ago, Ed shared with us the story of Zacchaeus, who wasn't just any tax collector. He was an archetelones. He was an arch tax collector, one of the top guns, one of the top perpetrators. And Ed shared with us just how despised tax collectors were. I was thinking then, let's face it, they aren't the most popular people today either. But 2,000 years ago, they were renowned for basically committing fraud all over the place and being on the side of the occupying Romans. Jesus had been drawing huge crowds doing God's work, and then he sees one of these greedy, cheating, financial businessmen of the day. What's going to happen? Will he rebuke Levi with some scathing words? No. Instead of condemnation, Jesus issues him with an invitation. Instead of ignoring the outsider, Jesus offers him the chance to join him. And quickly, like with Zacchaeus, Jesus ends up at Levi's home for what the NRSV and NIV call a great banquet. Instead of going all out to fix a problem along the lines that we might expect, Jesus receives a great feast from Levi, and it's thrown in Jesus' honor. In fact, the Greek word that's translated as banquet, doche, has the sense of a reception. So it's receiving guests and giving them an entertaining time. The text emphasizes not that Jesus gave or fixed something, but that Jesus took the time to receive a banquet and the accolades of an honored guest. Jesus' solution is to share food and receive hospitality, and the other guests are tax collectors. And Matthew and Mark stress, not so much Luke, but Matthew and Mark stresses sinners. Today, in our passage, Jesus is surrounded by outcasts and people we all want to avoid. And so our topic for today, as we move to thinking about how we might respond to the marginalised, is receiving from them. I reckon to many of us, this probably seems a bit backwards. Surely the emphasis should be on us giving and donating and helping people who are maybe in poverty or socially shy, or maybe they are victims of war. So, for instance, I'm sure many of us, and we've spoken about it already, think of the Ukrainians and the war over there and how unimaginably awful it is for them. And I'm sure we consider giving money, giving our prayers, or even opening up our homes to accept those who are homeless and fleeing to a foreign land where they are naturally outsiders. And I hope it's clear that, of course, there's nothing wrong with thinking like that, with thinking of blessing and giving and helping. Of course, the point is not that Jesus didn't give, because we've already said Jesus taught and blessed and healed. He even gave his life for every single one of us, no matter the mistakes we've made. But I think there's something equally problematic about the attitude of only ever giving, only ever donating and serving, often anonymously and at a distance. I actually think there can be something a bit closed off, maybe even arrogant, about the idea that we can't receive. If someone's at risk financially, then we must do everything that we can to support them. That is what we're called to do. That's what we want to do as a church. But to say that we can't receive anything back is perhaps to say that they don't have anything to give and share with us. It might sound noble not to receive back, but it creates or maintains a distance between us and them. Clearly, this isn't about receiving payment for services rendered as if they have to give something to us for us to help them. It's not about that. But it is about sharing. It's about being open to one another. I wonder, I suspect, that we often go into these situations of wanting to bless and help other people in order to achieve a goal or fulfill a duty. That's kind of in our mind, or it certainly is in my experience, for me. And I think this can kind of subconsciously create a safe distance between us and what feels compromising or what might feel uncomfortable. For instance, when we dutifully listen to someone that has been racially abused, maybe we go home before we actually receive something of their culture that might challenge or is just simply strange to our own culture. In other words, are our hands full of what we are ready to give, such that we don't have hands ready, open to receive? Jesus was open to the hospitality and skills that Levi had. Jesus' answer to Levi was to receive Levi. And Levi didn't waste any time. Verse 28 says, "And after dropping everything and rising up, Levi followed Jesus." Levi was thrilled to join Jesus, and he was excited to put together a feast for him. Ed said in the first week that this series is not about diagnosing who the marginalised are and then fixing a problem. In Ed's words, it's not about fixing a problem, but creating opportunities. And this week we can see that Jesus' attitude was to receive as well as give. Crucially, this created opportunities for both Levi and Jesus. It created shared experiences of friendship as Levi, in our passage today, as Luke calls him, becomes Matthew the Apostle, or at least that's what tradition says. Matthew the Apostle, one of the 12 closest friends, Matthew, who wrote the Gospel of Matthew, as tradition tells us. So what might we miss out on? What might they miss out on when we don't welcome them in, when we don't have hands open, ready to receive, as well as give? This kind of openness, I think, is radical. It can feel strange. And how about, let's put it like this. Are you ready to receive hospitality when it feels wrong? While it's good to go round to a grieving widow's house and you want to do something, just anything for them around the house, take the strain for them, are you actually ready just to stop and share a cup of tea? and actually share their grief. When Jesus watched rich people donating lump sums to the temple, and then a poor widow came along who couldn't even afford to give a penny, and yet gave it willingly. Jesus didn't see this and tell her to keep her money. I mean, she needed it to live, but he didn't tell her to keep her money. Rather, he said it was worth more than every other offering that day. Even the little that we have to give is a lot in Jesus' economy.
Walking with Jesus to the edges and beyond. Have you ever been blessed or received from someone in an unexpected way?
When we were a young couple and moved to a new area, we joined a small evangelical church, and there was another couple there who were very friendly towards us, particularly the wife. She invited us regularly to Sunday lunch. She asked me to join her prayer triplet with another lady, where I learnt a lot about prayer, having come from a very traditional church background where the congregation really didn't have opportunities to pray. When our children were born, she would turn up on the door with a cake. If we moved house, she would bring us a meal. She was very kind to us, even though she was a mum of 4 herself.
A particular time was many years ago when, on one Saturday following 6 weeks of illness, my mother died. We'd been visiting her in hospital regularly over that time, and that was on a Saturday morning. And then 7 days later, we received an early morning call, and Anne, my wife's mother, had then unexpectedly died. And the aftermath of that obviously was quite traumatic in many ways. The blessing was that a young man from the church turned up at the front door and said, "I don't want anything." He said, "I'm here to cut your lawn." And he said, "Don't worry about the garden." And he came in on at least 2 or 3 occasions over the next few weeks and just cut the grass, which would have been quite a job when your head is full of everything else.
Around about the year 2000, I had the once in a lifetime chance to go travelling and join my best mate on the other side of the world. I applied for and got a working holiday visa for Australia, which allowed me to stay in the country and work for a year. The thing was the airfare. So I asked my dad if he could loan me the money for the airfare and I would pay him back when I returned. He agreed, and I got everything all sorted out and got ready to go. And just as I was about to leave, he said that the money for the ticket, he didn't want back. He was giving that to me as a gift, and I was gobsmacked.
Our biggest and most recent blessing from God through someone else is where we now live.
Last Sunday, I came home from church to find that my lovely husband Stu had done the ironing for me. This may seem a small, mundane task, but that is precisely why I felt so blessed by him doing it for me.
How did this make you feel?
She was very kind to us, even though she was a mum of 4 herself. That really made me feel valued as a person and as a Christian. It gave me a lot of confidence in myself, and she really was a role model for me in many ways of how to behave as a Christian, how to pray. She taught me so much that I have taken with me into life, and I will always be thankful and value her for that.
I suppose it wasn't the most crucial thing in the world, but it meant every time we stood at the kitchen sink and looked up the garden, it looked nice, it looked lovely, and yet I hadn't had to spend hours out there cutting the grass at a time when there was so much else to think about.
Well, I was bowled over by his generosity. Dad had always said that he had intended it to be a present and that he didn't want it back. I'm fairly certain, my sister will see me right on this, that he'd never actually been in a plane. He'd been to Europe, but he'd never actually flown before, and that he was so pleased that I was getting out to see the world. I wrote postcards, and he did a lot of postcards, and Dad's was always the first one that I wrote, and I'd call him up as regularly as I could. I was so blessed by by the act of this, and I've never forgotten it. Thanks, Dad.
To receive this blessing made us feel very honoured, humbled, and a bit fearful as to how God would fulfil it, but He is faithful.
And so I felt that all the stuff that I normally have to do was valued by him because he knew that it needed to be done. Sometimes I feel like I'm on a bit of a conveyor belt and there's so much stuff that I need to get through, and him doing that one task for me just gave me some breathing space and some time to do something that I chose to do instead, and I really, really appreciated that.
Thanks so much for sharing, everyone who contributed there. Gifts are powerful, aren't they? Gifts of giving, and when we receive gifts, they're powerful. And yes, Joe, I think my favourite was yours. We just heard about how... Is that right? Yeah. We just heard about how giving and receiving can make us feel valued, how it can have a big impact on us. And in these examples and in what we've talked about today, I want to be clear, it's not about an either or. I hope it's clear anyway. It's not an either or of either we help them or they help us. No, it's mutual. This is about a sharing that brings us closer together, even in those places where we think God can't possibly be at work there. So back to the Calais jungle. I asked you that if you went to a refugee camp, what would you do? What would you be thinking? I went there thinking that it was time for me to give. And yet we didn't spend the week volunteering. We did help dispense some sleeping bags and some tents, which were vital to new arrivals. And a couple of us did go and work in the warehouse for a day, where they sought the donations. Again, a vital act. But most of our time in our group was spent sitting and talking and eating. We got to know Hashmi, who was our main host. He was an Afghan refugee. He taught us a song that I still remember. I still have no idea what it translates as. There's part of me that's still a little worried that one day I'm going to sing it and something not so good is going to happen. But I still remember it. And I clearly remember as I walked up and down the main street and the refugees would beckon me into their homes, by which I mean shacks of cobbled together wood and as much corrugated iron as they could find. They only had the food that was handed out twice or maybe 3 times a day by volunteers, and yet they welcomed us in. They handed over their food for us to share, and it felt so wrong. Like I remember conversations like, can we not accept it? But it just felt so wrong, and yet to them and to me in that moment, it was hugely meaningful. It was such a significant act. And then we just talked. Most of them weren't Christians. To be honest, some of them might well have even hurt people and committed crimes to get there. In fact, I know that there were a lot of ethnic tensions in the camp between different people groups. There was violence and there was sexual abuse in the camp. And yet this experience that I had of just going and meeting people, of being open to them, having my hands open, it was a watershed moment for me. I learned about God. I received so much from them, so much from God through these people, just by being with them. They gave me so much when I wasn't expecting it. I was hoping to help them in some way. And this experience, it shaped my first 3 years at uni. And most of our conversations, they were just in broken English. They were mixed with miming of gunshots from where they'd come from. Or on the other end, it was just broken English about how much they loved football. My nickname was David Beckham. Sadly, the similarity is in name only. So I couldn't fix anything for them. But I shared my time and I shared whatever they had, whatever they wanted to give. And I'm so grateful that I didn't just go as a volunteer with other charities, as much as that genuinely is a truly vital thing to do. And we all know it's truly vital. But I got a chance to treat people as people, to spend time with them, and that was a really difficult thing for volunteers to do. They were just too busy. And I hope that these people that I met felt humanized and valued by it, because I know I did. I didn't treat them as a task or something to fix. I treated them as people to listen to receive from, and they blessed me. I was open to wherever those conversations would take me. It wasn't a nice, easy distance of I'm going in for a purpose. I had to be open to what might be said or what might happen. If we take a completely different example, one person was telling me that they help their friends and neighbours on a regular basis with quite a number of things. But when their friends give them a gift to say thank you for everything that they do, well, it feels wrong to accept it. We don't do it for ourselves, right? We don't do it to get gifts. Well, no, we don't do it in order to receive, but we can share this meaningful act of friendship, especially when we know that they are struggling in some way. I shared the only food they had in the Calais jungle. It feels wrong, and yet it's beautiful and it's special. But in the book that we are exploring together as a church, or we're considering, and I do recommend it if you get a chance to read it, God is Stranger by Krish Kandiah. In one of the chapters, I think it's when he looks at Jesus and the stranger, he quotes actually a very damning survey asking 16 to 30-year-olds who were outside the church, how do they perceive the church? And their answers had 3 words to summarize it: anti-homosexual, judgmental, and hypocritical. So if can we have the quote up on the screen? Or is that not going to be possible? It's not going to be possible. I will read it out anyway. Krish Kandiah, in response to this, asks, what has happened to the church? We are supposed to be following in the footsteps of one who was criticized for being a friend of sinners. And yet we are known more for our fault-finding than our friendship. No wonder they think that God is as good as dead. I don't know about you, but I found that hard to hear. And yet it does demonstrate, this in a way demonstrates that Jesus' brand of friendship is radical, it's uncomfortable, but it is transformative. His kind of friendship goes both ways. It calls us to be open to people who aren't easy company. We need to give and receive hospitality from those who are grieving, from those who are disabled, from those who are racially abused. We need to give and receive hospitality from people who have different opinions on gay marriage. To give and receive from other Christians who prefer swinging incense to an electric guitar in church. to share with criminals like paedophiles and identity thieves. And let's be totally clear, let's not tame the particular focus of today's text. The account of today's stories across Matthew, Mark, and Luke, they collectively specify that Jesus is receiving from sinners and criminals. Not only the people that we have sympathy for, but sinners and criminals. When the Pharisees and scribes questioned the disciples, how on earth can you eat with these people? They kind of had a point. These guys weren't simply people we can have sympathy for and then criticize the Pharisees for their meager compassion. These people were criminals, wrong-uns who deliberately deceived and hurt people, and their stigma was deserved. This is a radical way of approaching life, isn't it? This is a really, really hard way of approaching life. And there's no one answer to how a situation will go or exactly how we need to respond to that situation. But this principle of receiving as well as giving, it's a powerful one. I do want to make one thing clear, though, that this isn't about putting ourselves in harm's way. If there's a question about safety for us, if that's the scenario we're facing, if there's a question about safety, then we do need to take reasonable steps. We are a family, we want to look after one another. Safeguarding is very real, it's important. If you want to know more about that or think more about that, do come up to us at the end. It's not about putting ourselves in harm's way, but this is risky, it's challenging. As we draw to a close, if one particular way that you're challenged about giving and receiving, about sharing real experiences with people, one of the ways that you're particularly challenged it is by sharing with other Christians who believe and worship differently to us, then as Ed said, there's no better opportunity to challenge yourself by coming down to St. Mary's to worship as churches together in 3 Sundays' time. Let's show that we are united. Let's show what the world is missing. So, in summary, sometimes it is easy to give, but to receive and to be truly open to other people can be really hard. And if we get better at it, however, and walk with Jesus to the margins, imagine what God will do in and through us. Amen.